In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, I'd like to begin by thanking the Islamic Society for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope you find the lecture enjoyable and also informative. On the topic of God's existence, you may have come across someone who is apathetic to the question of God's existence and may shrug their shoulders at the very idea of talking about the existence of God. They may feel that it is completely insignificant to their lives. However, many atheist existentialist philosophers like Camus and Sartre have concluded that God's existence has an immense amount of significance to our lives in the topic of meaning and purpose. That God's existence will give us an objective meaning and purpose to our lives. I believe that there are two more reasons why we should be considering this question, does God exist? The first is that the question of God's existence is fundamental to any type of worldview or philosophy that you may have. For example, ethical philosophy or political philosophy. Those topics, those discussions, can be inevitably traced back to the question, does God exist? And the way in which you answer that question. For example, ethical questions like abortion, euthanasia, same-sex marriages, political questions like the amount of freedom in society, tolerance, what are there any limits to tolerance, how free is man? These questions can inevitably be traced back to this fundamental question, does God exist? So, with a question like that, having such an impact on all of our philosophies, then it is wise to address such a fundamental question. Also wise to come to a lecture on time, so that you get the beginning of the talk. Assalamu alaikum, welcome. The other aspect which is important, the other reason that we should consider a talk, a discussion about the existence of God, is because it's in our interest. Now, Pascal put forward what is known for as the Pascal's wager. He said that the reason that God exists is because it's in our favor. He said this, he said, if you believe in God and God doesn't exist, well, you don't really lose anything. But if you believe in God and He does exist, then you gain the world. You gain infinity. An infinite amount of joy in the hereafter, in heaven, for example. An infinite amount of joy and happiness. And he said that if you don't believe in God and God doesn't exist, then fair enough, you don't lose anything. However, if you don't believe in God and God does exist, that means that you have lost out on infinity. An infinite amount of joy and happiness. And potentially have an infinite amount of pain and suffering in the hereafter, namely hell. Now, this, according to Pascal, was seen as a good argument for the existence of God. I personally don't think this is a very good argument, and this argument has been criticized by many philosophers, and Voltaire called it a childlike argument. Just because something is in your benefit, it does not mean it is true. But what I would say here is this, that we can take this argument and place it somewhere else. I think that Pascal misplaced this argument. And I think that when it's placed in an area to make us consider the question of God's existence, that when we use this argument to say that one should not ignore the question of God's existence, then it becomes a good argument for that purpose. So two more reasons why we should consider this question, the existence of God, why we're even talking about it, besides it being potentially true, that it is fundamental to all kinds of philosophy that we have, and also it's in our interest. But what about the arguments and evidences for God's existence? Bertrand Russell once asked what he would say if he found himself on Judgment Day facing God. And God asked him, Russell, why didn't you believe in me? And he said he would reply simply by saying, not enough evidence, God, not enough evidence. And this is pretty much the prevailing view within our society, our culture, which is can be traced back to the Enlightenment movement, that there simply isn't enough evidence for God's existence. It's an untenable position to maintain. But the question is, exactly enough evidence for what? To force someone to become, to believe in God, to coerce that person into accept the reality of God? No, there's never going to be enough evidence for that. For a kind of mind control. There's never going to be evidence for that. What there is enough evidence for someone with an open mind and an open heart to discover the existence of God, the reality of God's existence. So what I'd like to do this evening is run through, depending on the time, some arguments for the existence of God. And the first one that I want to mention is the contingency of our existence is an evidence, is a reason to believe in God's existence. Now, have you ever asked yourself, why does something exist rather than not exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? The most fundamental question in philosophy is, why does something exist rather than not exist? Imagine you were walking through the woods one day, your usual woods in Nottingham, and you came across a ginormous, translucent pink ball. There's no reason why I chose the colour pink, I just came to my mind. Could be red, could be green. And what would be the first question that you would ask yourself? What's it doing there? What is that ball doing there? It wasn't there yesterday. Why is that ball there? Now, suppose we took that ball and we increased it to the size of a tower block. Would you still ask the question? Of course. The same question would apply. What if we took that ball and increased it to the size of a country, or even the size of a planet, or even the size of the universe? Would you still not ask that question? Yes. The question of the explanation, to find the explanation of that ball, is still valid. It does not matter how much you increase the size, that is still a valid question. Now, there are two types of existence. There is an existence in the sense of a necessary existence and a contingent existence. Now, a necessary existence is something that exists out of its own necessity. It just exists. It doesn't have to have anything else to explain its existence. Now, many mathematicians believe that numbers and functions and sets exist in this way, that the number 2 just exists. In contrast, there are contingent existence. So for example, this podium, this brother here, his glasses, the seating area, the building, that camera there, that bucket there. All of us here are contingent. We need to have an external explanation for our own existence. Now, when we look at the entire universe, the universe is obviously contingent. Because it could have well have been the case that it didn't exist. It doesn't have to be here. The universe does not have to be here, by the way. It could have been the situation where it didn't exist. And it couldn't have been in this form. It could have been a very, very different universe. So in that case, if the universe is contingent, then we need an external explanation to the universe. But that external universe would have to be something that is immaterial, because it's outside of the universe, and it would have to be timeless. Now, there are two candidates that can fall that. There are two candidates that fit that description. The first is abstract objects, and the second is an embodied being. Now, abstract objects will not help us here. Why? Because they can't cause anything. For example, the number 2 is an abstract object, but it can't cause anything. It can't cause this bottle, for example, to tip over. It can't cause anything else to happen. It doesn't have any causal power, meaning it's just there. It doesn't have that ability to do anything in that sense. So the only candidate that we have is an embodied being. to explain the universe. And as theists, what we mean by that is God. A second argument is that a transcendent cause is the best explanation for the origin of the universe. For the origin of the universe. Now, once upon a time, cosmologists used to postulate what is called the steady state theory, that the universe was eternal. But recent discoveries in science, have shown that the universe is not eternal in the past, but actually has a cosmic origin. Discoveries, for example, by Edwin Hubble in 1929, and discoveries by Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson in 1967. Their discoveries confirm that the universe is expanding. Now, why is that important? Does anyone have an idea? No? Yes? Yes. The expansion of the universe, just to add to that point, the expansion of the universe, in theory what that means is that if it's expanding, then if we were to rewind the history of the cosmos, it will inevitably arrive at a finite point. The physicist P.C.W. Davies, he says that the coming into being of the universe, as discussed in modern science, is not just a matter of imposing some sort of organization upon a previous incoherent state, but literally coming into being of all physical things from nothing. Now, so what the Big Bang, basically, what that signifies for us is that the universe is approximately 13.7 billion years old, and that the origin of the universe signifies the origin of all space, time, and matter. Now, that is not to say that alternative models have been put forward to do away with this for some scientists, this annoying and stubborn origin of the universe. However, the 20th century has been a century of failed attempts to do away with this annoying and stubborn origin of the universe. And there is yet to be a commendable and coherent alternative to the Big Bang. A leading cosmologist, Vilenkin, he says, "It is said that an argument is what convinces reasonable men, and a proof is what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning." Now, besides scientific reason, there's also philosophical reason to why the universe must have a beginning. For if we have an eternal universe, that means that we have a beginningless universe that presents to us immeasurable problems. Firstly, to speak of an infinite universe, a beginningless universe, would mean to say that there is an actual infinite of past events. An actual infinite of past events. But that would assume that actual infinites actually exist. Now, there is a discussion within the mathematical circles about do actual infinites exist in set theory. But what we can say on the surface that it's clear that infinites don't exist. For example, imagine I had an infinite number of coins stretching all the way back there. And I was to take away all the odd coins. And each coin was numbered up to infinity. And we take the odd coins. Now, if I subtract the odd coins, how many coins would I have left on this side? An infinite. But then how many coins would I have on this side with all the odd numbers? An infinite. So infinity take away infinity is infinity. So we end up with contradictions. Perhaps the greatest mathematician of the 20th century, David Hilbert, he said, "The infinite is nowhere to be found in reality. It neither exists in nature nor provides a legitimate basis for rational thought. The role that remains for the infinite to play is solely an idea. But say, for argument's sake, we say, okay, actual infinites, they can exist. Say, for argument's sake, we say that they can exist. But does that help the situation? Does that help the atheist who is arguing for a beginningless universe? No. Why? Because when we start talking about the universe being infinite, it is an infinite series of past events that is formed by successive addition. So one would have to prove that we could have an actual infinite by successive addition. But is that possible? No. What is the largest number that you can think of? No one's bothering. The reason that you're not bothering is because you can't think of the highest number, because you can always add one more. Well, what that means for us is that for the present to actualize, the present to happen, i.e. me being here, these are great, no advertising, I'm just saying they're great. You get the student versions that are that big. For the present to actualize, we would have had to have traversed, gone through an infinite series of past events for this situation to happen. So what that means is that for this moment here, you listening to me talking and really enjoying this lecture, for this moment to happen, you would have had to have gone through an infinite series of past events. But guess what? For the moment prior to that, i.e. me coming into the room, there would also have to be an infinite series of past events. But guess what? Before that, there would have to be an infinite series of, and so on and so on. And what that means is that today, now, me talking to you would never have happened. Because you can't travel an infinite, because you can always have one more moment that you have to pass. But obviously that's false, because I'm here talking to you right now, right? So that shows that the universe cannot go on forever. So we have good reasons, scientifically and philosophically, that the universe does actually have an origin. And that origin has to be brought into existence. Why? Because how do we suppress the inevitable question? That if the universe has an origin, then what caused the universe? How do we suppress that? Look, imagine you were having a conversation with me, and I said to you, yes, I walked into my living room and there was a tiger there and it was eating all my furniture. And you said to me, well, how did it get there? And I said, oh, it just popped into existence. It just popped into my living room and started devouring the furniture. No one would accept that in that room. Well, I hope, anyway. Right? It'd just be an unintelligible response. No one, a reasonably minded person, would accept that unless you needed some help. So in the same way, that's why we ask the question, then what caused the universe? And that cause, by definition, must be outside of time and space, must be a transcendent cause, namely God. Thirdly, a third reason is that the initial conditions of the universe posit intelligent design. Welcome. You're just in time. It was once believed that the universe was a product of random chance. And that any universe, any kind of combination of the initial conditions, would result in a universe that could sustain intelligent life. But what we have now, that scientists have been stunned to realize that the initial conditions of the universe are fine-tuned, carefully crafted to sustain intelligent life. But firstly, when we talk about intelligent design, what do we mean by that? Well, the way in which we carve up our experience is to distinguish between randomness, chance, accident, natural forces, material processes on one side, on one hand, and design, purpose, intelligence, intention on the other. This is how we make sense of the world, by knowing the difference. Now, the way that we make that distinction is by eliminating chance and necessity. And the way that we do that is we recognize something that Professor William Dembski calls specified complexity, which is high probability with an independently given pattern. Now, when an intelligent being acts, it leaves a trace of specified complexity. And it's only when we recognize this that we can make the difference between design and something that is a product of nature. Now, when we look at the initial conditions of the universe, it cries out specified complexity. Now, there are many examples of fine-tuning. I just want to give you one. The prominent cosmologist Alan Guth writes, "A change by just one part in 10 to the power of 55, the rate of expansion of the universe would have led to the universe to expand too little, too much, with a consequence of rapid collapse," which means that it would be impossible to sustain intelligent life. Now, there are a number of these that need to be fine-tuned, a great number. And the eminent mathematician Roger Penrose from Oxford University calculated that the odds of all the fine-tuning, all the examples of fine-tuning, the constants and the arbitrary quantities, to all fall within a life-permitting range, is one chance out of 10 to the power of 123. Now that's one chance out of 1 followed by 123 zeros. We can't begin to comprehend such an enormous number. Now, it may be hard to comprehend that because they're quite abstract. What does that mean? 10 to the power of 120. What does that mean to us? Well, let me give you an illustration. Suppose we take North America and we fill it with coins all the way up to the moon. That's 239,000 miles, by the way. It's a useful piece of information that you can use someday, hopefully. And we took 1 billion other same-sized continents and did exactly the same. And then we have 1 billion coins. And then we got 5 red coins, and we mixed it amongst the billion coins. And we took Zard, and we blindfolded him, and said, if he finds 5 red coins in 5 goes, he gets £1,000 from the ISOC charity. Yeah? Is that possible? No? Never mind. And lo and behold, he has 5 goes, and he picks 5 red coins out of the billion coins. The odds of that happening, calculated by a professor called Hugh Ross, scientist also, he said the odds of that happening are 1 chance out of 10 to the power of 37. 1 followed by 37 zeros. That is astronomically, infinitely smaller than the numbers that we're talking about. Just one constant, i.e. the expansion of the universe, is 10 to the power of 55. Do you see the difference there? These are the probabilities that we're talking about. So hence, the initial conditions cry out intelligent design. If we use the same canons of reason that we use in day-to-day life, then we can conclude safely that the initial conditions of the universe are a product of intelligent design, a transcendent intelligence. Now, detractors of design, people that argue against this, who want to downplay this fine-tuning, postulate something called the multiverse. The multiverse. And what this does, it increases the probabilistic resources, so therefore it's no longer a surprise, because there are so many universes, and that therefore one of them's got to be right? Now, it's a bit like Darwin's theory, what Darwin's theory did to complex organisms. What Darwin's theory did was took away let's say, the ore or the design appearance of a complex organism. In the same way, a multiverse will do away with that design aspect, the intentionality, the purposeful design view of the initial conditions of the universe. But there are problems with this. The first is that if we apply the principle of Occam's razor, then it becomes a problem. Why? Because the principle of Occam's razor stipulates this, that we do not postulate entities beyond necessity. If one entity does a job, don't make other ones up. For example, if I lost my phone, if my phone was stolen, I would say someone stole my phone. I wouldn't say 150 people stole my phone. Well, that's ridiculous. If one person can steal the phone, it may well be, but when we approach the topic, we just safely assume that one person stole my phone. Okay, that's an example. So when we talk about the design of the universe, the most simplest, so Occam's razor stipulates that we should have to use the most simplest answer to a question. So the simplest answer is that we have an intelligent design, rather than this mother universe creating an infinite amount of contingent and variegated universes. The other thing that's wrong with this idea is that there's no independent evidence. There's no independent evidence. There's no evidence to suggest that there is a universe outside of our universe, let alone an infinite number of universes. No evidence whatsoever. It becomes pseudo-science. You might as well start talking about Hades controlling the underworld, right? It's equivalent to that. There's no evidence whatsoever. And lastly, very importantly, is this. Many cosmologists would argue that the multiverse would also need design. The multiverse itself would need design. So what's actually happening is you're taking the problem of design and you're pushing it up one level. You're passing the buck. Design is that annoying bump in the carpet. You suppress it somewhere, it comes out somewhere else. That's the problem with design. So it shows that there is no way we can do away with this aspect of design. No way whatsoever. So it shows that the cogent response, the cogent answer to the fine-tuning of the universe is a product of intelligent design. Design outside, intelligence outside of the universe, a transcendent intelligence. Time. Okay. My fourth argument is the existence of an objective moral realm. The existence of an objective moral realm. Now, when I talk about objective morality, what I mean is that it is valid and binding whether we believe in it or not. For example, to torture a child for fun is objectively morally evil. You all agree, right? Okay. But guess what? If everybody said no, it's a good thing, right? Besides calling the police, what we would say is that that person is wrong. Why? Because objective morality is independent whether we believe in it or not. If the entire universe, if the entire world was populated with people that said it was a good thing to torture a child, they would all be wrong. Right? It's independent. Now, without God, what reasons do we have to believe in objective morality? Now, what typically follows from atheism is that we live in a spatio-temporal system, closed system, i.e. that all that exists in the world can be understood by using our physicalist terms, like chemistry, biology, and physics. But the problem here is this, that science, our scientific instruments, cannot find morality, because science is morally neutral. Morally neutral. Because moral properties, morality, does not have a feature about it that is physical. It doesn't have a touch, a size, a shape, a density, a structure of it's not made from particles. You cannot find good and evil in a test tube. Right? So we have a problem here. So then, where is this good and evil in the world that is supposed to be just a material world that we're supposed to be able to discover using our best scientific theories? Where is good and evil? The late J.L. Mackie, a prominent atheist philosopher of the previous century, confessed
He said moral properties constitute so odd a cluster of qualities and relations that they are most unlikely not to have arisen in the ordinary course of events, without an all-powerful God to create them. So what's Mackie saying here? He's saying this. He's saying, look, if you believe that good and evil exist, you're going to have a hard job explaining it when you believe in a naturalistic or materialistic story of creation. Can you tell the brothers to come down and leave a few rows? Which brothers? Yes, can you come down? Thank you. So he's saying, what Mackie is saying here is that you're going to have a hard time explaining that, right? If God doesn't exist and all that exists is the material world, how are you going to explain that? He's saying this, look, if we trace back the history of the cosmos, these particles come out. Sorry, subtlety is not my thing. Sorry, I do apologize. So we have the history of the cosmos, and then we have these particles coming into existence, and these particles form, and they generate planets, and some of these planets have the necessary and sufficient condition to form intelligent life. Right? 13.7 billion years, take away 5% of that, and then suddenly Homo sapiens, with their arrival, with their evolution, then suddenly we have good and evil suddenly appearing. So up until the point of human beings, we had what is the case, a description, and then suddenly we start talking about ought and ought not. Mackie's saying this is arbitrary. Why would that make a difference? Why would we start talking about in moral terms just because human beings come on the earth? There's nothing special about them, right? Up until human beings, for the majority of the history of the universe, we start talking about what is the case, which is not morality. And we start talking about what ought to be the case, which is morality. He says it doesn't make sense. It's not consistent. It's not congruent. It doesn't fit a world view where all that we are is matter. And God doesn't exist. There's nothing special about human beings. So we have to see that there's nothing special about human beings in any way. Look, all that human beings are a byproduct of a lengthy evolutionary process. That's all that we are. We're advanced primates. That's all that we are. There's nothing special about us. If God doesn't exist, you have to face up to that reality. Why would we have moral worth in any shape or form? Look, when we look at the animal kingdom, it has no moral dimension. But if we're animals at the end of the day, then why is morality suddenly come into the equation? Look, when you look at a hawk, when a hawk steals from another hawk, it steals a piece of fish from its claws. Do we accuse the hawk of stealing? No. Or if a shark forcefully copulates with another shark, do we accuse the shark of rape? We don't do that, do we? Because these things aren't forbidden in the animal kingdom. Then why are they forbidden in human relations? If we are, according to many scientists like Dawkins, just animals. Why are they forbidden? They shouldn't be, right? Massimo Pellucci, a biologist, he writes this. He says, what we call homicide, rape, or even infanticide is very common amongst different types of animals. Lions, for example, commit infanticide on a regular basis. Now, are these kinds of acts to be condemned, he asks? I don't even know what that means, because the lion doesn't understand what morality is. Morality is an invention of human beings. There is no such thing as objective morality. Of course, in our society, we do condemn acts like rape and incest. Rape and incest, right? We do that, and rightfully so. But that means nothing. That absolutely means nothing just because we condemn them. What that means is that they're just social taboos. That morality is a social convention like driving on the left side of the road or right side of the road. Okay? It's like not having the etiquette at the dinner table. So imagine you invite one of your friends, he starts picking his nose, right? You wouldn't morally condemn him. You'd say he's socially inept, right? Never invite him again. But you wouldn't say it's an immoral behavior. You wouldn't describe it being immoral. In the same way, our morals without God are reduced in the same light. So then what can we describe our morals to be in that sense? If they're not objective, what can we describe them to be? Paul Kurtz, a prominent humanist, he writes this. He says, moral principles that govern our behavior are rooted in habit, customs, feeling, and fashion. So, habit, customs, feeling, and fashion. But if that is true of our moral notions, then how on earth can we have the moral high ground, if it's based on just fashion, to condemn someone who commits rape? How can we condemn them? Morally speaking, that is. How can we condemn them? Even though, if we're evolutionists, there is actually an evolutionary advantage to committing rape because you increase your progeny, right? But putting that aside, how can we, as we're reasonably minded people, how can we begin to condemn that person if that's all our morals end up as? If atheism is true, if God doesn't exist, then morality is nothing more than subjective expressions of personal taste. That's all that morality is. But that goes against our moral intuition, our moral experience. When I asked all of you, is it wrong to torture a child for fun? All of you agreed. Why? Because you do believe that there are some things that are objectively wrong and objectively good and evil. There is a qualitative difference between showing love to a child and torturing a child. You can't be indifferent. But the only way in which that we can rescue the notion of morality is if we ground it in something objective, a transcendent vantage point. Transcendent vantage point. Something that is outside of socio-biological evolution, cultural conditioning. And that is God. So the best explanation for objective morality that we believe exists is the existence of God, in which we can ground it in. And lastly, my last argument is that God is the best argument, God is the best explanation for the authorship of the Quran. Now, the author of the Quran asks humanity to take up a challenge to show and to validate its claims of divinity. So the author says, if you can meet this challenge, then fair enough. But if you cannot meet this challenge, then you must concede that this is a product of supernatural endeavor. Now, when we scan the Arabic texts, what we find is that they fall within two categories, prose and poetry. Prose is split into two, is mursal and sajja. Mursal is straight speech, like I'm speaking now, like when we read the newspaper, etc., etc. Sajja is like the poetry, rhymed prose that we have in the English language. And on the other side, we have al-bihar, which is poetry in Arabic. And the poetry in Arabic falls to a strict rhythmical code, and they have 16 combinations. Now, according to Muslim and non-Muslim scholarship, the Quran does not neatly fall within those two categories. Christina Nelson, who received her PhD in Arabic Studies from the University of California, writes, although some of the lines of the Quran may be scanned according to the classical Arabic meters, these are not as characteristic of the Quranic syllabic rhythmic patterns. The famous Arabist from the University of Oxford, Hamilton Gibb, writes, as a literary monument, the Quran thus stands by itself, a production unique to Arabic literature. So we have good reasons to believe that the Quran itself is unique in its literary form. It does not neatly fall within prose and poetry. But the question is this, were the Arabs, the 7th century Arabs, who were challenged at the time, were they successful in meeting that challenge? Now, it's worth noting here that the Arabs were connoisseurs of the Arabic language. They used to celebrate two things. When there was a birth of a child and someone rose amongst them to become a poet, they used to buy and sell in Arabic poetry. There would be contests and people gather around. It's probably equivalent to the UFC that we have today, right? People gather around, instead of throwing punches, they throw poetic lines at each other. So the challenge, they were well at to meet this challenge. It's a bit like asking the Arabs of Dubai to build a skyscraper, right? They were well placed to meet this challenge, but they were not successful. The late E.H. Palmer, professor of Arabic at Cambridge University, writes, "The best of Arab writers have never succeeded in producing equal merit to the Quran itself." The famous scholar of Arabic at Cambridge University, A.J. Arbery, who writes, "The challenge was taken up during Muhammad's lifetime, and the surviving specimens of emulation do nothing to undermine the Quran's claim to inimitability, neither do the crude parodies put out by later writers." So what we have is a challenge that hasn't been met, not just at the time of the 7th century, but up until now. We are yet to see a commendable example that meets this challenge of the Quran. With a finite number of letters and a finite number of grammatical rules, we would expect that after 1,400 years, and with all the enemies that Islam has, all the people that don't seem to like Muslims very much, we would have expected that we would have had this challenge met. So we have good reasons to believe that the Quran is outside of the productive capacity of the Arabic language naturally, and that the best explanation for it is of a supernatural one. So what we have is 5 arguments, 5 reasons why God exists. We have a necessary being. We have a being that is a personal being that is a transcendent cause for the universe. We have a transcendent intelligence behind the universe. We have a being that is the locus of all that is good and moral, and a being that communicates to us by revelation. Thank you very much for listening.